Before I get into a lesson today, I want to tell you how much fun Paula and I had on Christmas Eve with your Readers Theater. Congratulations to all of you actors who did such a beautiful job that night. It really brought back memories for us because we did Readers Theater at Unity Village 4 or 5 times. Plus, I got to hear and see James Dillett Freeman, who wrote the play that you did. I got to hear him do one of his own Readers Theaters. And so we sat there, we laughed. Your ears were beautiful, and so were the sounds, meow and all sorts of stuff. And congratulations to the pig. I thought you did a great job. The inspiration for this talk really comes from a class that I'm doing right now. Cherry, who is sharing with us this morning, is in that class, and so she's going to hear some very familiar material because we're doing metanoia, and I'll explain that in just a moment. So she should be very familiar with this. The idea of changing your mind and changing your world really comes from one of Unity's 5 principles. And I went to the key, what's called the Keys version, or the Key to the Kingdom, and Unity's 5 principles, and got a copy of it. And it really goes like this: human beings, that would be all of us, create their experiences by the activity of their thinking. And I thought, well, that's a good topic, because we ought to be thinking correctly and creating a wonderful world for ourselves. So what happens? Well, I started off with, how many of you know Leonard Cohen, the musician, singer? Most of you know his music. Well, he sang a song called The Future. I don't know if you've ever heard that one. I think he even did an album on it. And in this particular song, there's a refrain, and the refrain goes like this: when they said, repent, repent, I wondered what they meant. When they said, repent, repent, I wondered what they meant. Now, if any of you really know Leonard Cohen, he writes some mystical music. And so I took that to heart. And where you hear the word repent most often is in the book of Matthew, where Jesus has gone through his desert experience. He has gone through his little baptism with John the Baptist. And the Bible at that point reads like this: from that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom is near. Let me repeat that. From that time on, Jesus began to preach, repent, for the kingdom is near. Well, the word repent caught my ear, as it did Leonard Cohen. Now, Jesus wouldn't have used the word repent because that's an English word. He would have spoken in Aramaic. That was his native language. The word he used in Aramaic was then translated into Greek, the Greek word metanoia. The church then took it from the Greek and translated it into Latin, penitentia, which St. Jerome had influence over, and that word basically means penitence. And then we translate it into English, repent. Now, I don't know how you feel about the word repent, but to me, it's kind of a coarse, abusive, and harsh word, and has a lot of judgment attached to it. So it doesn't seem to fit the more kind nature of Jesus, and especially his good, what's the good word? The good news, repent. So I went to about 4 or 5 Bible sources. Now, these are the professional, these are the scholars, these are the men and women that really know the word. And I looked them up. Every last one of them, the first definition of the word repent is the simple change your mind. All Jesus is saying is change your mind, because the kingdom is right here. Jesus is basically saying what we've heard all along: change your mind, raise your mind to a higher level. And when you do, you'll see something differently. And when you see it differently, it'll change your world. And I've had personal experience with that. When I was a young man, high school age, I have to admit, I wasn't an academic student. I had some challenges in grade school and middle school and high school. I wasn't a bad person, but I just wasn't a good student. Lots of C's, a few D's scattered in, and an occasional B, but very few A's. When I was ready to graduate from high school, I took what was called the Florida Senior Placement Test. And that was supposed to, if you scored over 300 points, you could go to any state university. And I scored 247. So the high school counselor came to me. He looked at my academic record, and I remembered Mr. Fornash's words to this day. I've etched them into my brain. Mr. Schneider, you're not academic material. You either need to get a profession or join the military. Well, that was during Vietnam. So I quickly joined the Air Force rather than getting drafted. And something happened while I was in the Air Force. I had a chance to start studying on my own in order to get promoted and stuff. And all of a sudden, I started acing every test I was given. I got promoted ahead of time. I got honors. All sorts of stuff came my way. My mind was changing. I could study. However, I got out of the service and I went back home, and I wanted to go to the university because what really interested me at that point was the field of public health and health education. So I started my studies in health education and health management at the university. But when I first went back, guess what went into my mind? I heard Mr. Fornash. Mr. Schneider, you're not academic material. And I started thinking to myself, here I've got to take anatomy, physiology, microbiology, pathogenic microbiology, and all these other courses. What am I doing? I got so anxious when I started going to classes in the morning, I would go to the bathroom and throw up. Yeah. And after the first semester, I looked at all the A's that I had made, and I said, wait a minute. I aced 4 classes. Something's not right here. And then I realized I believed what he said, but I didn't believe in me. And I started taking to heart the fact that I'd done well in the military. And I was going to do well in college because I loved what I was doing. And 3 years later, I graduated with honors. I changed my mind, and it changed my life. That's what we're talking about. Some of you may have heard of a gentleman called William James. William James was, I'm going to say, a philosopher, a teacher, And he was also a psychologist. In fact, I think he's considered to be the father of psychology in the United States. He was the first to bring psychology courses into the academic area. Let me give you a quote by William James. "The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitude, his thinking, his mind." William James saw it. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore saw it. That's why we have the third principle. Dr. Phil saw it. Now that I know that's we're jumping into the fray here. How many of you have listened to some of Dr. Phil's wisdom? Dr. Phil wrote a book a number of years ago called let's see if I can find it here, the Ultimate Weight Loss Solution. Now that ultimate weight loss solution had 7 steps. And he said, you've got to go through all 7 steps, but if you don't do the first one, the others won't work. And guess what? Step number 1 was in that process. It unlocked the door. Right thinking. You had to get your mind straight about what you were doing, why you're doing it, and what it's going to take. Otherwise, it wouldn't work, because the old thoughts that you bring in there are going to come back and you're going to fail. There are 2 scientists that write for the Science of Mind magazine. I don't know how many of you take Science of Mind magazine. Paul and I do. We've been taking it for years. I do Unity, Science of Mind. I get all sorts of magazines. I love it. They do an article in there every month on science and religion. Or I think they call it science and spirituality. But they have written a series of books, how God changes your brain, what you believe and why you believe it. Let's see, what was the one? And we're doing one now, how enlightenment changes your brain, on Tuesday night. The class has been going for several years, and we're studying that book now. Dr. Newberg says that when you and I are born in our early years, we can't help but learn everything from outside sources. Everything is taught to us by our parents, our schools, family, television, society. And as young people, we believe what we're being told is the truth. And he says, no, you're not. What you're being told is not truth. You're being told what other people believe. And it's useful. It's useful. It gets us going in society. But he says, as you become a mature person, you should begin to question, evaluate, and test all your beliefs. And then find out what works for you and make it your own. In other words, change your mind. And he says, and the beauty of it is, in all their books, they give you techniques how to do it. How can you do this? He says, well, one technique is very simple. When something happens and you're about to have a reaction, or you have a reaction to it, stop. Pause. Remember the advice your parents used to give you about when something would happen, what you were supposed to do? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Count to 10. There's this area of our brain called the amygdala that is the fight, flight, and freeze. It's ancient, and it will go off, and you will respond and react before you even know it. But he says you can change that reaction if you can catch it. If you can't stop it and you continue with it, Within 24 hours, if you're still having that reaction, then you're almost impossible to get out. The amygdala will cement it in. But if you can do something quickly, you can literally change your brain. I've actually had that happen. I caught myself one day, I believe it or not, right after college, I drove an ambulance for a year, and I learned how to drive defensively. And so I'm very cautious when I drive, and I'm not very, well, I am now, but I used to be, I wasn't very kind to people that drove like idiots because I know where it can lead. And so one day I found myself clutching the steering wheel of my car because somebody raced by me in a 60-mile-an-hour zone doing about 90. And I knew I was having a reaction. And immediately I said, you know what? That's not my problem. And I started doing a mantra that I had learned. Only lasted about 4 or 5 seconds, and I realized my hands eased up. And I started catching myself every time until it got to the point where it is now, where I don't have to use the mantra. I just don't react. And that's what they're talking about. Change your mind, you change your life. I want to end the lesson today with a final story about 2 men who came together with completely different mindsets, who changed their minds and changed their lives. It begins with the story of a gentleman who was living in the North, and his company transferred him to the deep South, deep in the land in the heart of Dixie. Now, it wouldn't have been very unusual, except that he was Jewish, and the community he was in didn't have a lot of Jews. Very shortly after he arrived, he began receiving threatening telephone calls from a neo-Nazi. It aggravated him. He hated those people. He definitely didn't want anything to do with them. And he would curse him out. Finally, he decided, well, I'm going to just go tell the police they could trace this guy and pick him up and arrest him. The police knew who he was talking about. They said, look, they've been in the area a long time. We know who you're talking about. They've never done anything. So we can't do anything really until they do something. Well, he went home and he got to thinking about it. And he said, why should I let this man upset me? And in fact, why should I hate someone that I don't even know? And he made the decision that instead of cursing him or talking back to him or whatever, he would treat him with kindness when he called. And that's exactly what he did. Each and every time the neo-Nazi would call, he would treat him with kindness. Until one time he calls and he said, look, the neo-Nazi says, I'm surprised. I mean, you treat me so kindly. I'm confused. Can we meet and have a conversation? And the Jewish man said, well, we can meet, not at my place or your place, but someplace public. There's a restaurant in town that's got a nice big front window. We'll meet there where everybody can see us. And that's exactly what they did. In fact, they enjoyed getting together so much that they met weekly. One time when they met, the neo-Nazi said, I've got a problem. I said, what is it? He said, I'm being thrown out of the group. He said, they don't like the fact I'm meeting with you, and I don't want to give up these meetings. I'm benefiting, but they're blackballing me. And not only that, I just found out I've got an incurable cancer. It's going to take a while, but everything's falling apart at once. And I can't go back to where I live because they know where I live, and now they're starting to harass me. The Jewish gentleman said, I tell you what, we've got an extra room in the back of our house. Would you come live with us? He agreed, and he moved in. As time went on, the neo-Nazi noticed that they would all leave on Friday evening to go somewhere. And he said, where do you go on Friday evening? He said, well, we got a small community that gets together and we have a service. It's called Shabbat. It's our Sabbath, Friday night to Saturday night. He said, well, can I go see what it's like? And he went. And he continued to go with him every night, every Friday night. And then he asked, he said, you know, this is really quite satisfying. Can I take a class in Judaism? And so he took a class in Judaism, and eventually he converted. Now, he lived 6 months as a Jew before the cancer took his life. He had no family there, no one to take care of him. So the Jewish family paid for his funeral and a headstone with his name and the date and a Star of David. These two men started in opposite worlds. All they did was change their minds, and they changed both their lives. They repented. They had a new thought, and that new thought led to a beautiful, beautiful world for those two men. And that's your lesson for today.